Hi, everyone. We're going to welcome folks to our session. I'm looking at the clock, seeing it's 1:15. We want to start on time, but recognizing people may be joining us as we're talking. So we'll have a few minutes to do some welcome and let people settle into our space. My name is Shira May, and I'm the Executive Director at Partners in Restorative Initiatives, or PIRI for short. We are a nonprofit organization located in Rochester, New York. And what we're going to do today is I'll start by telling you a little bit about our organization, and we'll have a chance to introduce myself and my co-facilitator, Nick Moore. And then we'll talk about some of our goals for today. We're going to have an overview of restorative practices presentation, followed by a breakout room where we'll get to experience a very condensed community circle experience. So welcome if you're joining us. So Partners in Restorative Initiatives has been in our community for about 22 years. We started as an all-volunteer organization, and much of the work of that early group was in the court system, really wanting to defer cases away from the criminal justice system and into community-based collaborative solutions. Since that time, we have worked with numerous school districts in our area, including Rochester City School Districts and many others, working to create restorative culture and climate. So restorative practices in schools looks like both proactive, creating a positive school climate, as well as collaborative responses to conflict and harm, and really working so that discipline strategies are more learning experiences rather than punitive. We also work with community organizations and higher education. We have went back in the day when we were in person, we were working with area libraries to put on talking circles, and we have a conference that has been put on every few years as well. So just a little about myself. I've been at PIRI for 2.5 years as executive director. I started learning about restorative practices as a parent in a parenting group. When my son was 2, having a difficult time being a parent, I was introduced to the circle process, and it was held in someone's living room. And as parents, we would come together and talk about our experiences. Every voice was heard without interruption. And for me personally, it was such a transformative experience. I truly just wanted to dedicate my life to this practice. So I'm always telling people this is the ultimate dream job for me, being here in this organization. And it's an honor and a privilege to be part of this summit and to get to sit with you today. I'm going to invite my co-facilitator, Nick, to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Shira. Hey, everyone. As Shira mentioned, my name's Nick. I'm a trainer at Partners in Restorative Initiative. I've been doing restorative practices for about 5 years now. I started at the Ghani Institute, working in a help zone there. But I think my first introduction to circles would have been when I was directing an after-school art and music program that was based in an empowerment model for the teens to carry the decisions and to learn to work together. And we ended up doing our meetings in circle and noticing how that really allowed for each voice to be equal, and the students just kind of naturally were able to get things done on their own terms. And so that was remarkable to me, and it got me interested in restorative practices. And so this is really close to my heart. I'm really excited to share this overview with you, and to be able to have an opportunity to hear how it's landing with each individual.
Thank you. As we start, we have a short session, just 45 minutes. So just one way to get to hear everyone's voice is we'd love to welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat. And we would invite you to write your name and what brings you to this session. Just a sentence if you would like to do that. And you can go ahead and do that as we're talking. So our goals for today are to help folks understand the philosophy of restorative practices, and we're going to go over some terminology, as well as some misconceptions that may come about, to differentiate restorative practices from restorative justice, which is a term people sometimes hear as well. And then secondly, we want to make sure that you're familiar with what restorative practices looks like. So we'll be talking about applications in schools, in communities, and also in the justice system. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them in on chat as well. We'll be here to help you out. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Great, thanks, Shira. So with when COVID hit, we had spent a lot of time translating all of our trainings from a in-person platform into an online platform. And so that was pretty scary at first, but I'm grateful to say that even though we're in some kind of strange Brady Bunch fashion, we still can organize ourselves in a circular order, and we'll talk more about that later. But so while we're not physically present, we still get a spirit, emotion connection that can happen during these trainings and these circle experiences. With that being said, I wanted to check in. Wondered if it's okay to have people share their videos so we can see each other. No worries if it's a preference not to do that, but I just want to check in with Shira real quick. Was there a rule against that I missed?
No, I'm guessing that, hi everyone, it's nice to see faces. Thank you, Nick. I'm guessing that because they turned off videos during the keynote, people had their videos still off. So glad to see your faces. Thank you.
Yeah, please join in with your video if you are comfortable doing so. So before we start our overview, and whenever we start a circle process, we make sure we do a land acknowledgement. And part of that land acknowledgement is recognizing that while circles have been, if we trace any of our lineages far enough back, we've evolved in tribes, hunter-gatherer, in circle, being able to develop a social emotional capacity, celebrating together, dancing, making art, making tools, etc. Also mourning, grieving, rites of passages, but also acknowledging that the land that we're on now currently, in regards to the 500 years of colonialism, acknowledging that this is not our land, those of us who are not indigenous, native. And so with that, a land acknowledgement, I'd like to read it. In keeping with regional protocol, we'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of Haudenosaunee, and by honoring the sovereignty of the Six Nations, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora, and their land that we're situated on. In this acknowledgement, we hope to demonstrate respect for the treaties that were made on these territories and remorse for the harms and mistakes of the far and very recent past. And we pledge to work towards partnership with a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And in addition to land acknowledgements, it's also learning that it's good to think about what practical action steps could be. So thinking about how we can be a part of changing Columbus Day, changing Indigenous Day, or Columbus Day to Indigenous Day, thinking about our children, grandchildren, what are they learning in school, and being sure that those narratives are being accurate. And also reading books by Native authors, making sure logos and the things that are not representing Native culture in a way that is respectful are being changed. And then there's initiatives where landowners can transfer their land into tribe jurisdiction rather than state jurisdiction. So those of us who are landowners, just paying attention to those initiatives as well. Just some ideas and action steps. I'm going to turn it back over to Shira.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate hearing some of those new actions. You know, when we talk about restorative practices, one of the things that comes up is there's often a misconception that it's kind of just loose or, you know, touchy-feely, feel good. We're just going to talk about things and then nothing happens afterwards. And in fact, the truth is that taking action steps is essential to restorative processes, especially when you're dealing with conflict, harm, and that extends to long-term oppression that comes out of colonialism. So taking action, things that we can do ourselves, we are being restorative as when we take action to address and repair harm. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through some slides. As I'm talking, I'm happy to take questions if you have questions on chat. Afterwards, we'll have a chance to kind of debrief and share our thinking about what you've heard. So, isn't it a different world on screen? It's just, oh my goodness, when we're in person, so much more relaxed. So I'm just taking a mindful moment to kind of shake out my body and get a little relaxed. And yes, please do that too if you want to. So as Nick mentioned, we at Peary, we have been involved with different kinds of initiatives. When we were in person in the building, we have people come into our space, which is actually located in the Rochester Mennonite Fellowship Building on Hillside Ave. It has a beautiful sanctuary where we can hold our circles and our trainings. But right now we are all virtual, so we encourage you to check out our website, pearyrochester.org. We have a monthly talking circle that's open to the public. And on Monday, September 21st, we have a circle called Envisioning a Restorative Community. It's actually going to be in the evening this time so that we can accommodate people who have requested some evening events. And so there'll be more information on our website. So we like to start with this quote: "There have been some societies that did not use the wheel, but there have been no societies that did not tell stories," by Ursula Le Guin. And to tell your story is truly the foundation and the philosophy of restorative practices. If you can think of times in your life where you didn't know someone well, and then you heard something about their life story, it transforms how we think of people. It gives us so much more empathy, so much more compassion, and also connection. We connect through stories. And one of the very simplest tools and strategies of restorative practices is to tell a personal story or ask somebody to tell a personal story. That is how we create vulnerability and connection and show that we are human beings regardless of what our role. So here's how we typically define this practice. Restorative practices reflects a philosophy that holds that all communities are based on relationships. The stronger the relationships, the less likely wrongdoing will occur, and the more likely wrongdoing can be repaired if it does occur. When I give trainings and talks, I often talk about my relationship with my son, Evan, who's 13, just started 8th grade, all virtual. It's a little different world. When he comes home from school, I try to think about what am I investing in our relationship. So that means to me that the first thing I'm going to do is something to connect. You know, how did it go today with that science test? Or, you know, what was the fun part of your day today? If I start off our connection with, Evan, you forgot your homework again, or Evan, you know, you didn't put the dishes away like I asked, you're creating that tension right up front. So the first thing we want to do in relationships is invest in connection. And then we can discuss if there was a conflict, if there's something we need to overcome. So we're more likely to be able to work through things if we have that solid, proactive foundation. Another way we talk about this philosophy is people are happier, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. So we like to think of restorative practices as doing things with people. I'm in a supervisory position at Peary as a director, and I really try to think this way. If I'm making an organizational change, how can I engage people in that decision making? How can I do it with them? And that's not to say there's not a place for authority. I still have the function and the role of making decisions and which grants to apply for, which clients to work for. But when folks in the organization have a voice in those discussions and can be heard for their challenges, their concerns, there's going to be a lot more buy-in, a lot more joint effort. So this philosophy applies to workplaces, it can apply to family dynamics, as well as in communities. And I'm thinking of currently in Rochester, there are a lot of discussions about what's the role of leadership in the city, what's the role of leadership in criminal justice organizations. And when we consult with organizations, we try to talk about how to create a culture that is collaborative, both within your organization and with the public. And back to what Nick mentioned about our land acknowledgement, we truly want to honor the fact that restorative practices emerged from indigenous practices all over the world. Most of the writings and the literature on contemporary restorative practices is based on Native American practices, which are still used to this day. Mohawk and Seneca and other nations continue to use native justice systems. They're also largely based on New Zealand. The Maori community uses a justice system that is unique to that setting, but really all over the world, so African, Asian, Celtic, etc., and as well as Jewish, ancient Israelite communities. I am, my mom's Israeli, and I can remember as a child doing Israeli dances in circle. And I think about, what was that communal feeling like in my history? I think that sense of belonging and community is, it's in all of our DNA. And so a lot of what we do is remember what that feels like. And for many of us in our families, we may have lost that connection. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick to go through the next few slides.
Thanks, Shira. So you'll notice this is the social discipline window, and this is a tool that we able to add some dimension around different styles of discipline. And so oftentimes when we hear the word discipline, we think about, it means that the foot's about to drop. And in this context, we think about discipline as the root word, the Latin definition of it meaning to teach. So these are different styles of when to teach and how to, when you're in a natural positionality of leadership or authority, so to speak, whether parenting, teaching, whatever your role is in your organization, how do you handle opportunities to teach? And so when we look at this model, it's split up into 4 quadrants, 4 different styles, and then you'll notice there's 2 continuums. And so to kind of describe how this works, it's a tool to be able to reflect on how we're approaching teaching. So the first continuum, the one on the left that goes up to down, so that's control, boundaries, limits, discipline. Another way to label that continuum is accountability. And then the continuum on the bottom, encouragement, nurturing, support, and you can label that continuum as relationship. So just kind of to describe those 2 continuums. And then the 4 boxes that you'll notice where they fall within those continuums is how we can kind of gauge the nature of that style. And so if we start with the top left one, that is a very high sense of accountability. There's limits, there's a very clear sense of control. It's a very clear understanding of what happens if you step out of line. And at the same time, there's a very low sense of the relationship being a priority. So there's not a lot of support, not a lot of encouragement. Nurturing is not the priority there. So that falls in the punitive category approach to teach, which, I speak for myself, but also observing, working in different schools, having gone to school. Punitive is a very popular way of handling discipline, and cases where that is something that's when it's a matter of safety. When we think about, if there's a fire in the school, you're not going to have the kids sit in a circle and discuss the democratic process of exiting the building. You got to, be very focused on the boundaries. Let's get out of here, and not so focused on the relationship in those settings. But if we go to the next box underneath, looking at there's a very low sense of relationship, the support's not there, control is not there, and accountability is not a priority. That's kind of the neglectful approach. And we observe that in different classroom settings, perhaps different parenting styles when people are exhausted, hands off, feeling like it's above their pay grade, so to speak. Just very much, if you're a teacher, you kind of hand out a packet and say, I'm not going to engage in anything other than just do what you want. And so we think about what are some outcomes of that approach. And oftentimes it can be kids, whether they're aware of it or not, aren't feeling safe. They'll be pushing past boundaries. There'll be just a sense of chaos, a sense of just unrest, and it can be a triggering environment for students, especially who are coming from adverse backgrounds. And then we look at the other box next to it. Lots of support, lots of encouragement. The relationship is a huge priority. The teacher, the parent, etc., wants to be the friend. And then, however, there's a very low sense of accountability. So it's can be observed as permissive, and the outcome could be a learned sense of helplessness. Kids might try to take on the role of creating those boundaries that might be more authoritarian than just out of a result of not feeling safe and needing to create those spaces as kids, taking the role of the adults. So just different outcomes that you can observe from those three. And then we move to the top right, which is the one where we try to do as much discipline as possible in that category, where there's a really high sense of limits, boundaries, accountability, and also the relationship doesn't suffer. So you really can hold both at the same time. And we find that when students, people who are in positions of receiving directions are far more likely to comply when they feel like their voice matters, even in matters of when a student behaves outside of a guideline that they were a part of making. That accountability piece can still be there by still expressing, we care about you, we want you here, and we know that you're a good, wise, and powerful person. We find that that's reducing suspension rates in a school setting by 40% after 3 years of implementation. It's a remarkable difference, and relatively, not long after implementation, we see those kinds of results. And I would love to dive into this more, but we want to also make sure we get through the rest of the content. So next slide, please. This is when we think about what does it mean to implement restorative practices in your communities. So it's a tier system in that it starts with the foundation, and then the rest of the tiers are dependent upon that foundation. So in the first tier, you'll notice that that's when you spend a lot of time, 80% of the time in circles will be community building. So we're focusing on developing social emotional capacity, sharing stories, developing trust, getting participants to experience what it's like that every person is an equal member and with equal voice. And all teachers are learners in the circle, and it's an opportunity to articulate common values and to be able to connect on that. You can have safe and brave spaces where you can share. Upon sharing stories, you start to learn and empathize with people's different cultural backgrounds, where they've been privileged, where they've been subjugated, and being able to strengthen relationships as a result. And it provides that opportunity for people to really humanize one another very naturally, and building that understanding, that respect. And as a result, people are feeling that they belong to a community and they're wanted there, and they feel safe and a sense of commitment. And that's all done in that first tier. That foundation is so important to spend time building, and that's with the community building circles, the talking circles, that's what that all encompasses. And then when conflict naturally happens, we start to kind of shift the paradigm from a lot of us is assimilated to a culture, colonial culture. We're quicker to go to war than to actually sit down and learn from our differences. So when conflict naturally happens, it's actually, for 500,000 years of evolving, it's been an opportunity to participate consciously in differences as an opportunity to grow and learn and to understand each other better. So tier 2 practices, restorative discipline, restorative conversations, that's when there's a real process in place where we can learn that there's two perspectives. There's the experience of both, all people involved, and then what actually happened. We get to learn from our perspectives. We get to learn from our differences, and restorative practices provide a profound opportunity to do that. And it also, in regards to the tier 2 realm, thinking about how we can build better understanding rather than allow our differences to divide ourselves. So similar to what Eric was talking about earlier, it's just really being able to unite on our differences instead of letting it divide us into more paradigms of hate. And then tier 3, a lot of us have heard of restorative justice. That is where tier 3 is that's where it's the top tier in regards to when there's a very clear offender and a very clear victim, and the victim has an opportunity to have voice in their experience. And then the offender is coming to the table ready to take accountability and to truly face the impact of their behavior. And restorative justice has been an incredible movement in being able to not have a victim be re-traumatized by never getting an opportunity to have a voice, and then also to have the offender really take accountability, not just receiving a punishment that perpetuates a cycle, but rather really learning how to become re-implemented into the community, reintroduced into the community instead of creating more pain and more hate, cycles of violence. So I'm just noticing our time, and I want to check in with Shira. I think this goes until about, was it 2 o'clock or 1:45? 2 o'clock?
Yeah, I think it looks like we're in good shape.
Great.
Okay, thank you. I think just one or two other points to kind of connect. I thank you, Nick, for connecting what we're talking about to Eric's topic. Within our organization, we have really been taking a deep dive into talking about equity and social justice, and these tools are ready-made for talking about those topics. Within our teams, we hold circles that are tier 1 so that we can get to know one another. In fact, every meeting at PRE starts with a check-in round, which is just simply allowing every single person to have a voice. It sets such a tone of inclusion, and you know that diversity is about bringing people to the table with diverse experiences, but inclusion is about making sure everybody's voice is actually heard and listened to without interruption. So that's a strategy we find incredibly important. And then we also are using circles to repair harm to address when harm, because of racism or other forms of oppression does occur. And those are hard conversations. Sometimes people will say, I don't think I'm ready for that conversation. And that's okay, because restorative practices are voluntary. It's important that they are not done as a punishment, but rather an invitation. But what that says for us is we are asking people in our agency to think about how to get yourself ready or prepare yourself to have difficult conversations. And sometimes that means taking some time to think about your self-care strategies, or how can you communicate in a way that feels honest while managing your own emotions. But there's a lot that goes into them, and what I've found is the more practice, the stronger our muscles get in talking about harm, regardless of the kind of harm, but especially when it comes to racism. We know that white people, and I'll speak for myself, we don't have a lot of experience and opportunities, most of us, talking about issues of race. What does it mean to be a white person is not a conversation that I had around my dinner table. So it takes quite a bit of practice and fortitude to have these conversations. But we're finding that these tools are incredibly useful for that purpose. So we want to just talk about some of the benefits of restorative practices. We know that they build community, they help to resolve conflict. In schools especially, we see reduction in violence and bullying, provide strategies to address racial harm, increase engagement by all stakeholders in the community, and create a positive culture. And one of the tools we've been able to offer to schools and higher ed is to hold community forum. Because Zoom is so great, we've actually been able to do it on Zoom, where we may have 100 people sign into Zoom and give kind of some presentation for the whole group, and then have breakout sessions which are run as circles. so that all 100 people can actually have a voice and have their voices be heard. We talk a lot in schools about we need restorative practices to help combat disproportionality of suspension and other punitive disciplinary processes, and to interrupt what's called the school to prison pipeline, where we know that people of color who experience suspension in school are also disproportionately being referred to the justice system. And so to reduce suspensions, we have to give people an alternative strategy, and restorative discipline is one of those strategies. These are some other statistics about suspensions and feeling of belonging. And we will send you the PowerPoint. We're going to have the folks at Living Center send out the PowerPoint, as well as a couple of other handouts. We're going to share with you a handout on I statements, so how to use relational practices to get your message across, and also a handout on asking the restorative questions when you're in a conflict situation. But the final slide here is if you're interested in implementing restorative practices within your agency or school, these are some tips that came out of Oakland's implementation, Oakland school system. Just briefly, it starts with creating a vision. Why do you want to make a change? What are you looking to have happen? Assembling a team of champions, so making sure you have not just one person who is kind of the lone person who wants to try this, but make sure you find some allies, some team members who will be committed to the cause. And then we have, of course, trainings and consultation that we can do on the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 tools. And we can do them all online right now, thanks to trainers like Nick and our other dedicated team who spent a lot of time putting these on virtual tools.